According to the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, 1 in 10 middle and high school students in the U.S. currently use tobacco products. While cigarette use among youth has decreased from over 9% in 2014 to under 2% in 2023, e-cigarettes remain a challenge. Approximately 8% of youth currently vape. This marks a decrease from 2022, and the FDA is laser-focused on preventing more youth from starting to vape through its longest-running tobacco public education campaign, The Real Cost. Led by the FDA Center for Tobacco Products, Office of Health Communications and Education, The Real Cost marks its 10th anniversary aimed at preventing teen tobacco use through powerful messaging and real-life stories.
A lot of teens underestimate the power of nicotine, but it's a highly addictive chemical in cigarettes that can literally change the way your brain works.
If you vape, you could be inhaling toxic metals into your lungs.
My anxiety got really bad after I started vaping, and I was never an anxious person before.
FDA strategy has had to evolve over the years as social media and platforms that teens spend time on have changed rapidly. In 2014, Facebook dominated social media among teens, and streaming was just emerging. Now, most youth use platforms like TikTok, Instagram, and Snapchat, and fewer households have cable. So, how has The Real Cost stayed relevant as both preteens and teens have changed along with the media landscape? This is Empathy Affect, Forsmarsh Media's podcast that explores the human side of government. I'm Melissa Harris-Szynski, and today we're going to answer that very question. Joining us today are CTP Office of Health Communication and Education Acting Director April Brubach and social scientist Maribel Guo to reflect on the past decade and how CTP evolves in the context of an ever-changing media landscape to engage with our youth and educate them on the risks of tobacco use. Hi, you two. It's wonderful to have you on Empathy Effect. Thank you for joining us, April.
Oh, of course. Glad to be here. My name is April Brubach, and I'm currently serving as the Acting Director of the Office of Health Communication and Education at FDA's Center for Tobacco Products. And I'll turn it over to my colleague, Maribel, to introduce herself.
Thanks, April. And thanks for having us, Melissa. It's exciting to be here with you today. I work, of course, with April and focus on leading our efforts around digital and digital strategy.
While you two work on a lot of different campaigns, it is notable that you're close to the 10-year anniversary of the Real Cost tobacco public education campaign among youth. So since it's been 10 years, how are you reflecting on the past decade, and what was it like launching the campaign back in 2014?
Gosh, it seems like it wasn't that long ago, but when you put the numbers on it, it has been a while. I think we're so proud of what we've been able to accomplish in that decade, individually from a professional perspective, but also most importantly from a public health perspective. The campaign, the Real Cost effort specifically, was responsible for more than 587,000 teens from ever starting to use cigarettes, of which 300,000 of them would have become regular smokers. And so that has a really significant return on investment for every dollar spent towards prevention. On the campaign, more than $180 were saved in medical costs. And when you look broadly across the costs that would have been incurred had these people gone on to smoke, over $53 billion in savings was achieved. So prevention, especially in a space that where their main driver is addiction, is so important because as people move out of their teens and out of their young adulthood, they are no longer as susceptible to becoming addicted to tobacco products. And so the earlier we can start, the better, and in combination with the full comprehensive approach that CTP takes to tobacco product regulation. So yes, it's been amazing 10 years with so much change in terms of tobacco products, most at risk of being used by youth, but also the complete really change of the media landscape. And so we've had to really constantly evolve to ensure we were very much aligned with the means by which we could reach teens with these prevention messages. And it's been a great kind of continual innovation and learning experience for all of us. And we're quite proud of the work.
Absolutely. And thank you for sharing that overview. And I know we'll get a little bit granular in a second. You were just talking about how much social media has changed. So I'm really curious about that. According to Pew Research, most young people in 2014 were using Facebook, and streaming hadn't quite taken over broadcast TV, and really popular platforms like Snapchat were just on the rise. They're now some of the top social platforms among young audiences. So as the landscape has evolved, how has your media strategy changed over the past 10 years along with that changing media landscape?
I would say pretty dramatically, because our target for the real cost is teens. And so at the beginning of the campaign, we could rely on television to ensure our message was extended out and reached, at more than 80%, or I think 85% of the youth population. But among teens, the change in their use of various platforms really affected how we had to think about media planning and buying. So, for example, while television may still be a good channel by which to communicate to adults, recently, I believe Maribel presented on the notion that the golden age of TV is no longer for teens in particular. So that has meant a very dramatic shift from television to all types of social media platforms and also streaming video. Think of YouTube or streaming channels that also include advertising. So it's really shifted our planning and our buying because we move as the audience moves.
When there was a single dominant channel to communicate to our audience, it was a lot easier. We focused on a certain combination of reach, which is really how much of our audience is exposed to our message and how many times we reach them, which you can describe as frequency. But now that we're in sort of a much more complex digital environment, it's become a lot harder for us to find teens efficiently because of how fragmented the environment is. It's a lot harder to retain teen attention because of how competitive the environment is, and also because of increased ability to multitask. More often than not, even if you consider your own behavior when you're watching TV, you're probably also on your cell phone. And if, there's something that comes up in a TV show, you probably think, oh, well, maybe I'll Google that and, look a little bit deeper into it. So there's a lot of multi-device, multi-platform use happening in the digital space now, which really complicates this concept of attention. Sometimes it can heighten attention, of course, right? But also sometimes it can split it up and decrease the quality of the attention. And then also the digital landscape has made it a lot harder for us to measure what our true reach and frequency is because of sort of interoperability challenges in the digital space and just how disconnected it overall is. So again, this move from a single dominant channel has also fundamentally changed the way we experience culture.
Like Maribel said, the multitasking, variety of platforms, and loss of consolidated media consumption over the last decade makes advertising and messaging difficult, especially when you're trying to target a specific audience, like how CTP is with teenagers. On top of that, the teenage demographic is constantly changing as kids age in and out. So how does CTP juggle all of this? Well, it's a bit of data, and it's a bit of actually getting to know the teens they're trying to reach.
So the first thing we do is we look at national data sets and other sources of really rich and compelling quantitative data to understand the areas of most concern and the areas that public education campaigns are uniquely suited to address, especially areas in understanding of the risks and harms associated with tobacco use. So we start with the national data. We also monitor the conversations and the content on social media to understand more deeply the concerns and the topics of conversation. And then, kind of most importantly, we hear directly from teens. Every year, as part of our work, we do extensive focus group work with teens across the country. And we really get to hear directly from them as part of the current cohort of teens. At the moment we're having the conversations, what they're concerned about and what their attitudes, knowledge, beliefs, behaviors are with regard to tobacco products. So we rely on really this comprehensive set of information, both qualitative and quantitative, throughout every year to ensure that we're staying right where the kids are in terms of their needs, and that our messaging in turn is responsive, is clear, understandable, and memorable, and creates an opportunity for them to kind of change their thinking in a way that might prevent them from using a tobacco product.
In addition to the sort of like formative research process that April laid out, there's also a lot of other efforts that we engage in to make sure that we're getting it right for our teens and trying to, create messages that are as relevant and tailored to them as possible. So, for example, we've done a lot of work to try to understand what type of mindsets teens are in, both in terms of when they, access a certain type of media. So, the easiest example is always to say, when you go on Spotify or whatever your music listening platform of choice is, we all do this. If we want to relax a little bit, we know what playlist we want to pick. If we're going to go work out and we want to, have something a little to amp us up a little bit more, there's a different set of music that we select. And so when you're selecting or creating advertisements and selecting what type of advertisements to serve to your audience, these types of, considerations are important for us. But we also consider mindsets in terms of where a teen might be in terms of how susceptible or like the situation they might be in terms of how it might impact how they receive or think of using a tobacco product. And so, we're just trying to look for different ways or different levers to motivate our teens with the understanding that not everyone is in the same place at all different times.
Even with these insights, it can still be hard to hit the nail on the head with some of the messaging to young people. But CTP remains iterative, taking feedback and lessons learned to improve elements of their campaign.
So a couple of years ago on the e-cigarette teen prevention campaign, we fielded a bunch of creative concepts to our teens. And, we basically play like an animated sort of sketched out version of what we expect the final produced ad might look like. And one of these concepts featured sort of a medieval knight. And he was a little goofy. He spoke definitely in the specific language and cadence and accent of a medieval knight. And he was trying to communicate a message around, how when you vape, you could be inhaling or exposing yourself to metals. And it was universally panned by the teens that we were talking with. We had thought it might really be successful because it was when Game of Thrones was popular and, there's a lot more interest in sort of that period pieces, but it did not go well. And so we had to go back to the drawing board. And what was actually interesting was that it was the creative wrapper. It was the delivery of the message from the night that was not received well, but the tobacco fact itself was understood clearly. And that's also one of the things that we're always prioritizing, want to understand in our research. And what it turned out was that the teens said, honestly, this fact is impactful and it's scary enough on its own. And so we really took that feedback and ran with it. And the new version of this ad is what was ended up being produced. And I think it's still on rotation now. And the whole tagline was, the fact is scary enough. Metals can be in your lungs, and that's enough. We don't need to dress it up with anything special or any sort of goofy delivery.
If you vape nicotine, you could be inhaling toxic metals like nickel, chromium, and lead that can damage your lungs.
So when it comes down to, the tobacco message was impactful, and that's what we ended up caring about. And we ended up, through our formative research, learning through our teens how to more effectively deliver an ad.
Yeah, I think that's a great example of how talking to teens is such an important part of what we do. Getting together, as professionals, as public health and advertising professionals can lead to some great ideas, but maybe not all of them are great. And the way we hear the truth about that, we hear the honest reflections are through the focus groups, and that really helps guide what we produce in terms of creative. And we learn from the youth that we speak with whether the ads are understood, memorable, believable. We really take their feedback and prioritize that in terms of which ads we move forward with.
Yeah, and on top of getting that feedback and tailoring your ads to be more effective, you're also meeting teens where they're at, especially when it comes to developing partnerships and collaborating with influencers that teens follow. So can you walk me through how you've identified and worked with influencers across the Real Cost campaign?
Yeah, I can kick us off. Working with influencers has been an important part of our campaigns because, as you mentioned, they're frankly able to reach our audiences in ways that we can't. And importantly, when we can identify the right influencer, they can not only extend the reach of our campaign and our message, but they're able to deliver our messages in ways that are authentic and that connect with our audience because they have a pre-existing relationship that they have cultivated actively over time. And so this point around finding the right influencer is really key because teens can see through something that they feel is not authentic or something that's built on an exclusively paid relationship. And so for us, the best for us to work with are the ones that have personal connections to tobacco and also who believe in our message. But, something else I want to mention is that, there's often this perception that the best influencers to work with are the ones that are the most popular, those that have the mega tens of millions of people, in their followings. But, as I mentioned, for us, the most important criteria is not necessarily a large reach. In fact, we often work with micro-influencers or those who have more modest followings because of specifically because of the connection that they've been able to build up with their audience. When someone has millions of people in their following, you can't have that same connection, right? You're not able to engage with your audience in the way that you can when you have maybe 10,000 followers or 30,000 followers. And so for us, the primary things to keep in mind are identifying the right influencer who can authentically message to your audience. And this really makes our influencer programs complementary to our other media strategies that might focus more on other goals like broader reach.
You might be thinking, but Maribel, there are so many content creators and channels and platforms. How do you even know how to figure out who to partner with? Well, last year, the FDA released an influencer resource guide to help guide its own work and any other public health practitioners through the art of working with influencers and driving effective public education campaigns.
Last year, we actually published an influencer resource guide at FDA, and that's available in our tobacco education resource library. But, we found because influencers are consistently a topic that we receive questions about, and people want to learn more information around how we manage our influencer programs at FDA. And so if you Google online or look online, there's a lot of influencer resources that will turn up, but there are not many specific resources that are dedicated to public health practitioner needs, which are, of course, very different than a traditional marketer or commercial marketing's needs. And so, we have a guide that's available now for download on our website, and it has sections on planning, implementation, measurement, and we also include 8 different case studies that are drawn directly from our various public education campaigns.
Amid this guidance and the many collaborations CTPs had throughout the Real Cost campaign, one partnership in particular has stood out to me. In recent years, CTP has worked with Awesomeness, a network that started on YouTube but has since expanded into a multi-channel entertainment hub with interviews, funny reels, the first pansexual dating show, and more. While a lot of the content through Awesomeness is lighthearted, they worked with CTP to bring teens who'd vaped onto their platform to talk about their experiences. When I first heard these stories, I was chilled.
I went to a middle school for the performing arts, and my dream was to go to the high school of the performing arts. Everybody from my middle school basically auditioned for the high school. Vaping definitely messed up my dream. My voice was cracky and I didn't have the same range that I used to. After the dance portion of my audition, I couldn't catch my breath. I didn't do well. I bombed the audition. I don't go to the school. I didn't get in.
That was just one of so many stories I heard. Ruined college sports careers, life-changing health scares. It goes on with so many different videos and teenagers sharing their experiences. Now, CTP is gearing up for its next season in partnership with Awesomeness.
So I think we're in our third season of creating videos and testimonials directly with teens right now, or we're getting ready to launch our third season. And they're really powerful stories, because it's one thing for FDA to develop an advertisement and deliver a message in some kind of clever creative package with different emotional high points, but it's always a little bit different when you can hear directly from a teen who's experienced, addiction themselves, or the pain of having their relationships change because of their addiction to vaping. And there's just really no other substitute for that. So they're powerful messages. They draw on the real life experiences of teens and the negative ways that they've impacted their lives, or thought about themselves, or even thought about what they could achieve in their futures. There's a variety of themes that we touch on, including like mental struggles and addiction and so on.
Yeah, thanks for sharing a little bit about that. We've talked a lot about how the Real Cost campaign has evolved over the last 10 years and everything about tobacco products, the digital landscape, the upcoming generation of young people. These are all things that are still constantly changing. So as you're sitting here now and looking ahead, what challenges are you currently facing or anticipate facing in your campaigns and in how you drive your messaging? And, amid these challenges, which can be probably like something that's really frustrating, what keeps you motivated for the future of your work?
Yeah. So, we talked a lot about the changes in the digital landscape. And I would say that one of our biggest challenges that, we're currently facing and expect to continue having to work through in coming years is how do we continue to effectively reach our audience in this ever changing and evolving landscape? Because, media landscape we know today will certainly not be the media landscape in 5 years or so, with all sorts of new fun technologies from AI to, even the metaverse and so on. And so relatedly, our ability to measure what our impact will continue to be challenged because of how quickly this space is evolving. So as we've discussed, though, it's really important, though, for us to be fully embedded in the digital space because of where our audience is. More and more, I think, not less, will have to be engaged in digital. And, it means that we kind of find our place in this funny tension where we often have to engage in best practices before we know exactly how to measure them. So I think it was brought up earlier that it's a best practice to create content that feels most native to a specific platform. So that basically just means you want to create content that feels as natural as possible to the platform that you're already on. And what's natural feels might be very different from platform to platform. It's really hard to assess that in something like an outcome evaluation, which is often survey-based. It's also just not practical to include all the different campaign assets that we've developed in a single survey. And so inevitably, we're not able to always have a full understanding of what the full range of impact our campaigns have. And so, maybe it's a little bit of a small consolation, but this challenge is not just ours. It's the whole marketing industry is facing it. And so, of course, other public health practitioners who are engaged in public education campaigns are also challenged with the same challenges that we have. And, to be honest, some of the changes that we're seeing in the landscape now are good things. We just have to learn how to adjust. So something that's talked about a lot are the sort of discussions around privacy and increased privacy with specific regard to teens. And this is obviously a good thing, but it also makes it harder, or it can make it harder for us to find our audience online. So there are just implications that we'll have to continue to work through as landscape continues to evolve and change.
Yeah, and I guess I can weigh in on the challenges and staying motivated. I think, with any job and any profession, there's going to be challenges, but I think those are pretty easily overcome if you're really connected to the mission of your work. And for us at the Center for Tobacco Products, we're looking at reducing, the death, disability, and disease caused by tobacco products by regulating the marketplace and educating about the harms and dangers of tobacco. So when the day-to-day challenges get us done, we are, I think, lifted and remotivated by the knowledge of the importance of the work that we're doing. And that has been kind of a personal pursuit of mine since I lost my dad in the mid-90s to lung cancer from smoking. And then my brother just a couple of years ago, that these addiction processes that, begin or can begin in youth from using tobacco products can often be lifelong and have really devastating effects. So the work towards improving that situation for your own family, for others, is very motivating.
Yeah, that's so true. And I'm really sorry to hear about both your brother and your father. My grandfather passed away from COPD, and he quit smoking when he was a pretty younger adult, and it still came back to hit him with these health consequences. So your messaging just really runs true, and the work you do runs true. So I know we've talked a lot today about the work that both of you do, the impact, the challenges, and some of the hope. But as we part today, what is a final message that you really want to drive home to our listeners?
Well, I think I've sort of ended with maybe the first thing, which is if you're interested in this topic and what we're doing at the center, please come to our website. We have a number of resources, including the influencer guide that Maribel mentioned and a presentation on the changing digital environment that might be informative. But the other is to really consider a career within the federal government in public health, if that is what drives your passion for work. It's a great place to work with lots of opportunity to really be inventive, to continue to learn. It's really sort of a requirement for the work Maribel and I do in order to stay up with the changes and be able to create programming that aligns with, the current environment. We are always learning and planning, implementing, and talking to kids, because that is truly the most important part of getting the messaging right.
We have a real opportunity to, of course, not only impact teens and, helping keeping them healthy and preventing, more negative outcomes from happening, but also we have an opportunity to really change the field, to figure out how can we be more effective in the work that we do, and how can we help others be more effective in the work that they do. And that's not something you get to do with every job. So it's hard, but it's worthwhile, and it's fun too.
Fantastic. Thank you both again for joining us on the show. It's been a real pleasure to get to know the campaign and both of you throughout this conversation. And best of luck with the future of the campaign and all the work you do.
Yeah, no problem, Melissa. And if anyone has any questions, they can reach out to us at therealcost@fda.hhs.gov.
Thank you, Melissa.
Thank you.
The Real Cost campaign is still going strong, and if you're interested in seeing more of the campaign's unforgettable messaging or resources like the Tobacco Education Resource Library, we'll link to them in the show notes. I hope you enjoyed this conversation and that you'll join us next month for an episode about how data-driven decision-making and evidence building are improving how the Department of Health and Human Services delivers programs to the American people. Until then, make sure to subscribe, follow, and share the show with your friends. And don't forget to rate us on your podcast platform. Thanks, y'all.
Empathy Effect is a product of Forrest Marsh. You can reach us at forrestmarshmedia@forrestmarsh.com with any feedback, questions, or inquiries. If you want to know more about today's guest, are interested in participating with Forrest Marsh, or becoming part of our community, check out our show notes for more information.